Welcome to Men on Mission, a podcast brought to you by Men of the Kingdom. Our goal is to help encourage and equip men to live on mission for Christ 24/7. It's far too easy in our culture to sit back and to complain about the state of our world. But we believe that God calls the church to rise up and to take action, especially the men. With that, thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of Men on Mission. All right, Britt. Well, thanks so much for joining us on the podcast this morning. It's a joy to have you on the podcast.
Yes. Thank you so much for having me here. It's great to be with you guys.
Yeah. So for everyone listening, Britt, his story, he basically went to Northwestern University to study to be a police officer, right?
Correct. Yep.
Graduated in 2017, and the Lord has kind of directed him into the field of construction. So that's what he does. And I got to meet you, I feel like it was about a month ago now. Yep. And it was just so inspiring hearing the way you're using your skill set and your gifting in construction to make an impact and to bless others with the gifts that God's given you. So I was like, I got to invite him on. He's one of the kindest and most servant-hearted people I've met. You definitely have an evangelistic heart. And so I'm just excited for people to hear kind of your story and how God's working through you.
Yeah. I love being invited on, and it was so fun to meet you at the triathlon and be able to hear what you're doing here with this podcast and the idea of living life missionally. It's just something I've been passionate about for a long time, and it's amazing the different ways we're able to do that. So
yeah, for sure. Yeah, so kind of describe it for everyone. What is your mission field? What does that look like? I know you're construction doing that, but yeah, just kind of flesh it out for us.
Yeah, totally. So in working as a carpenter, so doing a lot of framing, building different things, I work with different guys from church, and we've been able to do a lot of things just in our day-to-day as far as a lot of our jobs. We work around here in Edina with a contractor, and we are able to go into people's homes, which to me is a really vulnerable place, for somebody to allow you into their house even for working on it. Mm-hmm. So I love even in our day-to-day being on mission of working with homeowners and not just being a standard construction crew or like, oh, those guys are just construction guys here, but that we're there with a purpose. And so even being prayerful about entering someone's home and being able to allow homeowners to taste and see the kingdom and to be able to be like, oh, wow, that was different than someone who just changed a pipe or built an addition.
Yeah.
And so one of the things that our contractor has said was like, we don't understand like what you guys are doing because so many of the homeowners have been, who were those guys? What was so different about them? We've never been so happy to have construction workers in our home.
Yeah.
And so it's been awesome. So cool to see that.
How many guys are on your team?
There's 3 of us.
Okay.
Yeah.
And do the other 2 guys have the same kingdom mindset as yourself?
Yep. Yeah. So we go to church together in Maple Grove, Church of the Open Door.
Nice.
And it's such a gift to, first off, I've done a lot of construction jobs in the world, but to be able to be with 2 other guys who have that kingdom mindset of the most important thing is not just can we get the job done, but how can we see people, how can we leave and people have tasted and seen something different.
That's amazing.
So
yeah, no, I love that. I mean, it just reminds me so much of Jesus because not only was he a carpenter, but also just the way in which he loved people. It, left them with an experience that impacted them for the rest of their life. So that's just really cool how you're being intentional going into each of those spaces.
Yeah.
So that's kind of one of your mission fields, and that's really a primary one. What are kind of the other mission fields that you kind of would see as you go throughout your day-to-day or week?
Yeah, I'd say one of the main areas or experiences in my life that really has shaped me was I worked with people with disabilities for 6 years.
Where'd you work?
ACR Homes.
Okay.
And so they have about 60 homes in the metro area, and I was never expecting to do it, but my brother worked there right after graduating Northwestern. I was like, okay, I'll try this out for a little bit. And then I just fell in love with people with disabilities, and they see the world in such a beautiful way. And so they have fathered me and shown me, they've coached my heart of what does it look like to see the unseen, see the often overlooked, and to be able to come close to, like I think even in the Bible, the idea of people being lepers or the untouchable. In the process of Jesus would always move towards those who were untouchable. And that process of what a gift it is to see the unseen and to move towards people who are neglected in different ways.
For sure. Yeah, I mean, you describe it as a gift, right? To be able to see them. So what's like one of the things you've experienced as you kind of unwrapped that gift and got to know some more of those people who are kind of outcasts?
Yeah. Well, I'd say I remember one very specific moment was early on in working. One of our residents, there's residents who have more like behavioral and then medical needs, and so one of our residents had he was more on the behavioral spectrum, and he needed us more to kind of help alongside with different whether it was yelling outbursts or different things he needed, and he loved when people would read to him in the Bible. And I was like, oh, what a fun thing. So I remember sitting with him out on the deck. This is like maybe 2 weeks into working there. And he said, I was talking with him, reading from the book of John, and you could just see this just pure delight. And this guy had a really hard life in that he had grown up with no disability, but had he had been shot. And so then he had lost ability to see. He was in a wheelchair. And I remember thinking, like the Lord just highlighted, wow, so many people would look and say, oh, wow, poor him. And I remember he just ministered to my heart in such deep ways because he loved so deeply. And so I remember just being so seen by him. Even though he couldn't see, I still, like physically, I always just think, wow, like you see the kingdom with different eyes than most people I interact with. And even though you're in a wheelchair, you move in a unique way and in a different pace. And it's really shepherded my heart to slow down, to not just look at the outside of something, but to be able to see someone and go deeper.
You're such a great example of someone who's just living life on mission and seeing people as their ends, not means to your ends.
Yes.
You can see them, and that's a big theme when we went through Men of the Kingdom, is there's no difference between the sacred and the secular. And wherever you go, you're on mission. So that I think you really helped flesh that out because you're out there, you're being salt and light. And when you're doing kingdom activities, oftentimes you're being ministered to as well.
Yes.
So what a great example that is. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, it's so cool because it's so clear that you have multiple stories from so many different aspects of life and different points. But where'd you kind of develop the mentality or the mindset or the heartbeat, I guess might be a better term, for living on mission?
Yeah, well, I think one of the things that shifted from my childhood growing up was we went to church, but it was very legalistic. We didn't have a lot of good role models as far as how to live that authentically. It was very much more check the right boxes, do the right things, don't do these bad things. And it was always presented as this is the best thing in the world. Like this is more precious than anything. And I just remember being this idea of tasting and seeing. And so like Psalm 34:8, oh, taste and see that the Lord is good. That has been how God has wired me of tasting and seeing something. So from my childhood of like growing up with a lot of neglect, a lot of abuse, to this tasting and seeing being, oh, I'm told this is kingdom, but it doesn't taste right. I don't experience freedom or life or fullness. And then to move towards these other places where I've had mentors in life, whether from Northwestern or church, who've engaged me in a way that they moved towards me. They actually moved closer towards me when I had hard places or I was sharing brokenness. And that was not my experience growing up. So this idea of, Lord, maybe your kingdom is more of moving closer to people who are hurting than further away, or they're not in yet because they're not behaving right. And I've just experienced so much life and freedom from that. So I don't know if that answers the question, but
it definitely answers the question. And it's cool to see how the people have come alongside you, whether it was at Northwestern or wherever, and just loved you and met you in the midst of your vulnerability and your transparency and your pain and your brokenness, transform you. I mean, that's what Jesus did, right? He meets us in the midst of our sin, in the midst of our brokenness. And then that's where healing occurs and restoration and all of the other things that are the result of the gospel. So it's cool just to see how it only took like, how many, like one or two, I guess, or just a couple of those type of interactions to completely kind of flip that switch for you.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's super cool.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, one of the things one of my mentors, Paul, will say is nothing that you gain or learn is specifically just to be kept for yourself. And this process of it is continually this restorative, regenerative thing of it is always meant to be given away. And so it's been a gift to me of, as I learn these new skills with different people, it's not just for Britt, it's how can I give this away? How can I keep blessing this? And how can I keep going with this? And the process of people tasting and seeing something different, just the multiplication of that is so powerful to me.
Yeah.
Britt, do you have an example of that from your mission field? I love the idea of, God said to Abraham, I'll bless you so that you will be a blessing, which is in concert to what you were talking about there. Is there, do you have an example of that where maybe God has used an experience that you've been able to pour out and bless somebody else?
Well, I'd say this is maybe in somewhat of the vein, it actually was something this week even, just this process of, I love discerning through, Lord, one of the frameworks I use is in this kind of just daily way is, Lord, you have my yes and you have my no, because I really want to be surrendered and submitted to him. Like I think of John reclining against Jesus' chest. I want to be close to hear the whispers and not just the shouts or the alarms that are saying something. But I was just praying through this last week, a couple, what are some of the best things for me this week? And there's this prayer meeting and this other meeting at the same time. And the one was on forgiveness. This psychologist he was 80 years old. He specialized in the field of forgiveness. We were talking about what does it look like to live a life that is forgiving. And so coming from a place of brokenness in my past, I've seen so much healing come from this place of forgiveness and blessing my parents and other people where there was abuse or hurts that had happened. And so being able to have received God's healing in that place. And so the 1 John, we love because he first loved us. So I'm receiving that love from God and allowing him into those wounded places, and then able to bless my parents, bless other people who've hurt me. And then we were just in church or at the worship night on Wednesday night. And this guy we were praying, and he was talking about, man, I just really want to understand forgiveness more. And it was so fun to just see like
the divine economy coming through.
Cool.
Yeah. And to say like, I just said no to this other prayer group with my buddies who I haven't seen since I just got back from a missions trip. I was like, I should really go to that. But the Lord highlighted this other thing that I hadn't ever been to. And then literally a week later, this guy's like, oh man, I want to know more about forgiveness. And I'm like, wow. Like,
yeah, that's so cool.
And he's like, can you send me those notes? Like, that's so cool. And he's just about to be a dad. And he's like, I'd love to have healing around these things.
Yeah.
And I was like, Lord, he's so, like my friend Mick will always say, God is so efficient in the process. He knows what we need. And if we're willing to listen to him, he will expedite things and give us gifts like that.
Well, that's a perfect example.
Yeah.
Well done.
Yeah, no, that's so cool. I love it. It's just, you have so many examples because it's so evident you're living on mission. I loved even just kind of the framework of like, God, you have my yes, and God, you have my no. It's clear that you've put thought to what does it look like to be like John and to like lay close to his chest and hear his whispers. So I guess, do you kind of have like advice for men as they're trying to think through like, how do I be like Britt? How do I live on mission each and every day? Is there kind of some kind of routine or method that you have each morning to kind of set yourself in that space or that mentality?
Yeah, I'd say maybe not as much of a routine. That's probably a growth area for me. But in the process of, one of the things I mainly, if I'm coaching men in any way, is to say, learn to build awareness. So I think there's many men I interact with, or people in general, that are kind of doing their thing. They're in their routine of what life looks like, and yet they'll be swept away by something. And I think it was because there's some of this living too much into fantasy, or not actually grounded in like, who am I? Where am I at right now? And being able to be really honest when we're struggling with something, and being able to come to that grip of, okay, Lord, am I seeing clearly today? Is there any ways I'm blinded right now? And I want to see clearly. And because I've done a lot of therapy in life, I've done a lot of groups, and I've walked through life with many men who are much older than me. And so many of them will say, oh, Britt, I wish I would have started this when I was younger. I lived so much in this fantasy thing that when I was 50, 60 years old, like life started to crumble because I wasn't really honest with myself. And so I think be willing to navigate, to have friendships and have accountability around, hey, be honest with me. If this doesn't seem like my character, I would love for you to be honest and check me on that, because we want to be growing and refining that. And I want to live in the reality, because reality, I can actually affect change for people rather than trying to present myself as better.
Certain type of person that you're not. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So I wouldn't mind circling back that phrase when you said, God, you have my yes, and God, you have my no.
Yeah.
I think that might really benefit a lot of people.
Yeah.
Could you give some examples? I think men understand my yes.
Yeah.
Where God is like, Britt, we want you to go on this mission trip, or I want you to go to that forgiveness seminar.
Yeah.
What does God, you have my no's look like in your life?
Yeah, that's a great question. The main thing I think of is Henry Nouwen. Is an author.
Look at you.
Yeah.
Nice.
He's one of my favorite authors. But
his work on The Prodigal Son was awesome.
Yes. Beautiful.
Great book.
Yes.
Yep.
And so he is such a fatherly man and just tender-hearted. And he would have this practice called the ministry of absence. And so he was a priest. And so when people would come into his office, they would sometimes ask his secretary, "Hey, is Henry with anyone?" And he would say, or the secretary would say, "No, he's alone right now." They're like, "Oh, good, because I need him." And they'd say, "Oh, he's not available right now. He's in, but he's practicing this time of absence." And this ministry of absence, there's often this ministry of presence, which we can give, which is much easier the yes. Mm-hmm. Oh, here, let me give you this physical time or space or money or whatever. But this process of intentionally humbling yourself, because it feels good even to be, oh, you want my presence? Oh, let me come bring that to you. But intentionally to say, hey, like, it's not me. I'm not the best thing for you, but my absence, like, I can maybe even hold you in prayer, and the Lord can hold you in that place. But that's where the power, I think, of being an intercessor comes in of, oh, Lord, you have my yes and my no. And so if it's a no to somebody, that power of interacting with them and saying, hey, I actually don't have capacity for this, and know that the Lord will hold you. Because sometimes that's the thing for someone to have breakthrough, where they're really leaning in on God and not just having humans interact, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Interesting.
Yeah.
I'll have to keep thinking about that one. I like it.
Yeah, no, I like it too. Now you got my mind thinking. And so I'm on this little tangent, but it's good. There's a lot there for sure. And I just think it's so valuable, even as I'm thinking about my own life. Like, what are the things, God, that you want me to say yes to? What are the things you want me to say no to? And I'm really good, or I'm pretty good at saying yes. Yeah. I'm better at it than saying no.
Yes.
There are things I should say yes to.
Yeah.
And then sometimes saying no is the hardest thing that we can do. And it's like you said, even just with, well, there's this prayer thing over here and there's this forgiveness thing over here, and they're both good things that would glorify God and that would advance his kingdom.
Yeah.
But like, how do I choose between these two things?
Yeah.
And then your ability to just be discerning and prayerful about it is just so cool. One of the reasons I really wanted to invite you on is just because every single time that we talked, it was so evident. Even just as we're talking here on the podcast this morning, it's so evident that you're always living on mission everywhere you go. And one of the stories that you shared with me just stood out to me, how you were using your carpentry skills to help build homes for homeless people. So can you just share a little bit about that and kind of cast that vision?
Yeah, so there's a group called Settled, actually, and so they're in Minnesota here, but they help to build sustainable housing for people experiencing homelessness by building tiny homes. And then you partner with churches because there's a Sacred Settlement Land Act that allows churches to use their land kind of however. And so they've worked with the legislator side of things to get it so these homes could be permanent. But the process is having churches from all around, different churches, different denominations, come alongside and partner to build homes. So they actually started their first settlement in St. Paul at a church, Mosaic. And so there's 6 or 7 tiny homes, and they do 2 of them you basically have resourced and unresourced people. And so two of the homes have people who have never experienced homelessness, but have came and are living inside the community. And then the rest of the homes are, we've welcomed people in who are coming off the streets and who have said yes to, hey, we want to live in a community. We want to be off the streets. And so the process is having volunteers. You raise money to build the homes. The work to be done on the homes is basically all donated. And so with me and some of my other guys from church, we helped to build one of the homes for one of the missionals, someone who's living, who hasn't experienced homelessness. And so it's this beautiful process of people coming alongside together who like are electricians or framers or roofing or, hey, I've got a big truck and I can tow the house. But just putting these invitations out sometimes and being able to invite people into using your gifts, the ways that God has made you in some of your time and talent to pour into something. So we've built at the first settlement, there's 7 homes. And the thing that I most loved about it was each house was built from a different church of a different denomination. And so this process of, this is so God's heart. In all these places where there can be disagreement, you see people say yes. And it's been so beautiful to see the relationships and the power of connection.
Yeah, no, that's so cool. I mean, one of the reasons it really just stands out to me is because I think it's a beautiful integration of like the provider. We talk about the 5 P's of biblical manhood: prophet, priest, protector, provider, projector. And the provider being more than just providing monetarily for somebody, but providing, and in doing so, you're using your time, you're using your talent, and not just the resources that God's giving you. And so you're providing a space for people to thrive and to flourish and to grow and to build relationships with believers and in community with one another. And so you're providing a lot more than just a roof over somebody's head.
Yeah.
You're providing an environment for them to flourish.
Yeah.
And then it's also integrated then with, I feel like, a lot of your heartbeat as far as your mission statement. And like just when we walk through in Men of the Kingdom, what's, our life mission statement, we talk about what are the burdens on your heart and what are the passions and giftings God's given you and how do those intersect. And it's so clear that you have a heartbeat for people who are overlooked and not seen and not valued and not loved. And you have a skill set of carpentry and you have a skill set of just loving people so well. And so you like combine those 2 things, and then it allows this space for people to just experience Jesus. And I think that's powerful.
Yeah, when you think about men on mission, one of the things that a man on mission will make the invisible church visible. You drive by a building, you see that's the church. But your example of the homeless, the community, the tiny homes, that was the invisible church, the body of Christ, of multiple denominations coming together, serving the least and lost, and giving people a chance to belong, to have identity, to give a chance to restoration. And a man on mission will help restore and help redeem. So that's just, what a great example. You are a really good example of what a man of the kingdom looks like. Well done. I'm proud of you.
It's seriously just a perfect example because you're seeing needs, whether that's like you're walking into a home and you're praying over them, or you're seeing a homeless person and you're taking action. Like you're not just seeing a need and then sitting on the sideline. But you're doing something about it, and it's just so powerful because you have story after story after story after story of people who have encountered Jesus because you're willing to say yes and to step in and to be obedient and to take action. And you're a carpenter. I just love that it's so tangible. It's not like you're this like just high level CFO that is known by every single person all across the globe. Like you're a man who's passionately in love with Jesus, who's captivated by the heart of the Father, who like I know is going to get to heaven one day, and the Lord will just say like, "Well done, my good and faithful servant." And it just makes it so much more tangible for somebody to be like, "No, I do have a broken past. Like I was abused, or I did experience brokenness, or I did experience pain." And God has given me gifts and talents, and I want to deploy them for His kingdom and help advance it. It's just it's such a tangible like every man listening can step up and be on mission regardless of where they're at or what their story is. It takes away the excuse.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So do you have, what advice do you have for those men out there? You know, whether it could be a promise of God, or it could be maybe a book that has moved you, or just something from your life that would help spur people into action so they can live life on mission.
Yeah. Well, I think even in continuing that thread, there is the one of the verses in my life that's really been profound is Genesis 50. So it's talking about Joseph. Joseph was thrown away by his brothers into a pit, sold into slavery, and the redemptive process for Joseph, in the end, when his brothers are coming during a famine to come and get food, and they have no idea that Joseph has been elevated to second in the kingdom of Egypt.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's this place of power, even though the story, the beginning of it, you'd say, oh, this could go nowhere good. Like this is death. This is the end. And one of the verses in Genesis 50 is, and what they intended for evil, God intended for good.
Mm-hmm.
And this process there is this idea of like it's continually coming back. There's this like recycling process.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the phrases that I use with the Lord is that he's teaching me or shepherding me in is keep coming home. And so much of life growing up was the do's and don'ts, what to do right and what not to do. And this is how you become a good Christian. But the more that I walk in relationship with God, it's this process of, can I keep coming home to beloved? Can I keep coming home to that voice that calls me beloved, who knows me, who sees me, who's with me?
Mm-hmm.
And so the phrase or the verses in the Bible, never will I leave you, nor will I forsake you.
Mm-hmm.
That's one of those just breath prayers of mine. Just never will I leave you, never will I forsake you. So I think the main advice or encouragement is no matter where you've been, no matter where you've came from, and the things that people have spoken over you, God has a greater identity. He has better things to speak over you, and he wants to call you beloved, and he does. And there's this reception of being the beloved of God. So I think that's my main hope for people, and to be able to not write people off, because you don't know where we're seeing somebody in their story. And that's a really important part too, because if you would have saw me back in my times of being abused, like I had a lot of anger. There was so much resentment and bitterness. And if you would have saw me then, you'd say, oh, it's all done. But if you can see me now in this process of I've been touched by a heavenly Father who is so kind, then I'm like, oh, wow. Like it's different. And there's this beautiful fruit that gets to come from that. And there's life. And I believe there's people who are hurting, who are looking around like, is anybody willing to move towards me? And like Matthew 8, Jesus healing a leper. The leper says like, are you willing? And the Lord says, I'm willing. And I love that picture of Jesus moving towards someone who is untouchable, saying, I'm willing, you have my yes towards you.
Mm-hmm.
And I love you. And there's no contingencies. There's no like performance that he needed to do. Jesus was willing, and he moves towards.
Yeah.
So,
Time for broken people to come home.
Yeah.
Boy, that's a good word our culture needs right now.
Yeah.
You can belong.
Yeah.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well done.
That's huge. I love it. Well, thanks so much for being on the podcast with us this morning. It's been a joy to have you and to hear your heartbeat. I've been encouraged and inspired, and I know that so many men listening are also going to be encouraged and inspired by your story. So praise God.
Yeah. Thank you, guys.
Good job.